I'm Daljit Nagra from the University of Reading, and this is the third of my 4 really brief talks about the poem Look We Have Coming to Dover. And if this is the first one you've seen, go to the beginning and watch them again, because it'll make much more sense. Thus far we've got the idea, just from looking at in the first lecture, looking at the title only of the poem, that there is an incredible kind of doubleness of language here. And in one sense, it's that doubleness of language, that multiplicity of meanings, that elevates this to the status of poetry. Meanings are compressed within seemingly simple phrases. There's a lot going on here. And that is what gives the poetry its richness. On the other hand, the fact that the poem therefore always means something other than what it means results in a work of irony. And irony, as we explored in the last video, isn't necessarily our friend. We can't reduce and resolve irony to a single meaning. It works precisely in the kind of the doubleness, the impossible doubleness of meaning. I'm going to explore that a little bit more by thinking about that little quote from the 9th century poetry poem Dover Beach, which the poem begins with, so various, so beautiful, so new. I think, we can definitely see how that translates into ideas about the poetry of the piece. I mean, this is a work where we've got coinage. There's this invention of entirely new words, and we've got adjectives that are acting like verbs. We've got seemingly unconnected words that are brought together to make compound phrases. The language is incredibly original, incredibly inventive, and very beautiful. A kind of a horrible, terrible beauty, but it's beautiful nonetheless, I think. But I think we can explore this a little bit more if we look at a quote. Let's go back to that quote right from the end of the poem that we talked about in the first lecture. Imagine my love and I, our sundry others, Blair'd in the cash of our beeswax'd cars, our crushed clothes free. We raise our charged glasses over unparasol'd tables east, babbling our lingoes, flecked by the chalk of Britannia. We can see here, I think, a certain doubleness of language, certainly. Charged glasses. Okay. So they're charged because they've got champagne in them. But they're also charged because someone's had to pay for them. This is about celebration, but equally it could be about economic exploitation. Free. Does that mean that life is being lived on the cheap? Or is this life lived in absolute liberation? Crash clothes. Are they bought with the time of the crash? Are they bought with the proceeds of the crash? Or are they just a crash? They're just terrible. A disaster of clothes. It's all those things, isn't it? And actually, variety itself, so various, is also curiously double. There is a kind of a variety to variety here. Imagine my love and I, our sundry others, Blair'd in the cash of our beeswax'd cars, our crashed clothes. One of the things this poem seems to be about is, as I said, a celebration of variety. Immigrants come to the country, and the result is this wonderful language and diversity of experience. Yet according to this narrator, the I here, although there are different, there is the I and there's my love and there is our sundry others, there's also something about these that are experiencing the same thing. They're our beeswax'd cars, they're our crushed clothes, they're our charged glasses. Although this isn't something that's actually happened yet, the narration's talking about a fantasy of what's going to happen in the future. That fantasy is a collective, or a fantasy about the collective. Rather than diversity, it's all about an ourness. What are we to make of that? You know, if there is a kind of a joke here, if there is a kind of an irony here, what is that? What is that irony? Well, one of the obvious ways of reading the end of the poem, and it's the one I think that's I hear a lot when I visit schools and talk about this poem, is the idea that, you know, at the end it's about a Victorian idea of what the future is going to be like, a kind of a brave new world of kind of difference and variety, coming up against the harsh reality of what variety is in the 21st century in the UK. There is a kind of a pathetic trajectory here. There is a kind of a bathos of understanding actually the very unglamorous reality of variety. But I think there's another sense in which this poem is about our own investment as 21st century Brits, I'd say, in ideas of variety and multiculturalism, because this multicultural experience does not seem to end in difference, but actually it kind of collapses into collectivism, a kind of a single and shared experience. This isn't about difference in that way. And that idea of something collapsing into collectivism, it kind of, there's something queasy about that. There is a sense in which the poem is taking on here the kind of classic language of kind of racism, of like them over there. And in fact, that's what this poem's doing all the way through, isn't it? It, you know, notice the way, it's a very famous thing about this poem, the way that the language calls upon the imagery of animality, for example, to describe those coming into the country. Okay. The idea here, isn't it, that what's happening in the poem is that new immigrants to the country are taking on a language and a point of view that doesn't necessarily do them any favours, that sees them as something other and as a them, you know. After all, you know, these last lines involve the narration talking about us babbling our own lingoes. Their own language is understood now from a position outside of it, as something less than language, in the sense that it isn't about articulation, but instead of babbling. There's another sense of what's going on here, though. Because even as this new language is adopted, even as those learning it, taking it on, are conforming to some pretty unpleasant understandings, that language is also transformed. The very moment of conformity to the language is a moment of transformation of the language, hence the poetry. So what have we got at the end of the poem here? I think it's a very complex take on what variety might be, and it's one that I don't think is really served well by thinking of the poem simply as taking the mick out of perceived Victorian attitudes to variety, and neither is it completely well served by seeing the poem simply as a celebration of variety. Instead, variety is turned against itself. It's ironic. It's doubled. It's irreducible variety.